If you're a Washington Capitals fan, you must be sweating every game, and I mean every game. This year is starting to prove the downfall of this team. With the exception of Alexander Ovechkin breaking records, I don't think anything has gone right for this team at all. The Caps, and honestly the Penguins too, are currently hanging by a thread in the standings with teams like the Islanders, the Panthers, and even the Sabres catching up. Could this be the year we don't see the Penguins or the Capitals in the playoffs? Focusing on Washington specifically, they haven't missed the playoffs since 2014. In fact, 2014 was the only year they missed the playoffs in over 15 seasons. But 2023 could be the next year where we don't see the Capitals in the playoffs, and there are numerous reasons as to why this is the unfortunate case. This team is heavily veteranized, as the average age for the Capitals is 29.6, the second highest in the league. They're also struggling with tons of injuries. They are struggling without Tom Wilson, John Carlson, Carl Hagelin, Nick Dowd, and Connor Brown. And I'm not saying that it's time for them to rebuild or anything, but it's time they make some moves to shake up their defense a bit with a guy who's been on the trade block for some time now. So with that being said, let's talk about Ducks defenseman Dmitry Kulikov. Kulikov is 32 years old, was a former first-round pick back in 2009. He's 6'1", 205 pounds, and he's a guy who just really hasn't found a home in the NHL just yet. He started his junior career in the QMJHL playing for the Drummondville Voltigeurs, where he was with some very familiar names in Sean Couturier and Mike Hoffman. He was pretty good there as a defenseman, notching 62 points in 57 games in his draft year, and he also had the opportunity to represent Russia at the World Junior Championship, where he played 7 games and had 4 assists in that tournament. And even before his time in Quebec, he played with the Lokomotiv Yaroslavl, which was in the Russia 3, now called the VHL, and there he had 19 points in 32 games. But since getting drafted, he's bounced quite a lot, as previously mentioned. He started really well in Florida for 7 years, notching his career-high 28 points there until he got traded to the Buffalo Sabres in 2016 for Mark Pysyk. Now, this trade, believe it or not, was a steal for Florida for the first 5-6 years of the trade. They got Pysyk, a guy who was cheaper than Kulikov, a second-round pick, and a third-round pick. Both draft picks became Swedish guys who never made the NHL. However, the second-round pick was Adam Masherin, and apparently he was crazy good in junior. He notched 100 points with the Kitchener Rangers in the same season this trade went down, and he still never got a shot at the NHL. Isn't that just crazy to think? It gets even better for Florida, as Kulikov only managed to get 5 points in 47 games during his stint in Buffalo. But they also managed to get that second-round pick, which became Rasmus Asplund, so the Sabres do have a chance to maybe flip this trade around. Rightfully so, Buffalo did not re-sign Kulikov, and he became a free agent in 2017, and would then sign a 3-year deal with the Winnipeg Jets to get a fresh start. He played all 3 years in Winnipeg, but barely any improvement. He notched 11, 6, and 10 points respectively. The Jets of course didn't re-sign him either, so he signed a 1-year deal with the New Jersey Devils in 2020. Through 38 games, he only had 2 assists and then got traded to the Edmonton Oilers in exchange for Charlie Leddy and some conditional picks, but he didn't do anything in Edmonton either. He just had 2 assists and then finally came to Minnesota in 2021. This time though, there was change. Kulikov went from a struggling 4-point season to a 24-point season where he scored more goals than he had points. He scored 7 goals last year and had 17 assists, getting very close to his career high of 28, which he did 10 years before last year. Think about it. You don't come anywhere near your total until 10 years later. What a story. But he struggled in the playoffs, and then last summer we saw him getting traded from Minnesota over to Anaheim for future considerations. And so yeah, here we are potentially seeing Kulikov get moved for the 8th time in his career, 857 games and 208 points. But despite his struggles and low numbers, Dmitry Kulikov has established himself as a pass-first defenseman with a decent two-way game overall. Clearly, his offensive abilities didn't appear immediately, but he was able to present himself as a shutdown defenseman. As previously mentioned, he notched his career high point total back in the 2011-2012 season, where he had 4 goals and 24 assists for 28 points in 58 games, even 11 seasons later, and he's managed to maintain a high hockey IQ and a good defensive game, which people can see if you watch the Ducks. Teams should be very interested in him considering he's a good 7th defenseman for some clubs, while a solid vet presence for others. The Capitals, a very veteran-oriented team, should certainly be interested in his services as we get closer and closer towards the March 3rd trade deadline day. But if we talk about Kulikov's contract for a sec, he's in the final year of a 2-year, $2.25 million deal that will end this summer. Although very affordable for several teams, this could backfire for Washington for 2 reasons. The first reason is because of his no-trade clause. He has an 18 no-trade list, which could be very interesting if the Capitals are and aren't on it. If they are on it, well, then they're in a very deep hole because they would need to look for another cheap defensive defenseman, which are rare this year given the trade bait list, which has barely any of those type of defensemen. But if the Capitals are not on it, which I personally would assume, then they will struggle to fit in Kulikov's salary. Take a look at Cap Friendly here for a minute and see the contracts. They have the Dylan Strome contract for one more year before he goes from $3.5 million to $5 million. They also have guys who take up nearly or above 5% of the cap in Anthony Mantha and Lars Eller. Then on defense, they're paying Dmitry Orlov $5.1 million, and he's been actually decent through these years, but contracts like these, if possible, should be removed. I doubt Orlov goes because he has a modified 5-team no-trade clause, but guys like Mantha and guys like Eller are probably best getting traded in the near future. Now, Kulikov isn't some star player where it's a must to get rid of these guys, but if they do have interest in him, someone on the team is going to have to go. The only question that really remains is whether or not trading for Kulikov as a rental has any benefits in the Caps' future. Do the Capitals trade for Kulikov in exchange for a player who could have been an integral part of their potential playoff run? Does Kulikov perform so well these next few months that he's awarded an extension? Could the opposite happen where Washington screws up the trade? It's risky, and especially for a guy who's not proved himself of anything for nearly 10 years, it could very well be in the Capitals' best interest to say no to this. However, the Capitals' defense is top 10 in goals against, and they still have a strong penalty kill, so Kulikov can help them in two ways. With that being said, it could be very reasonable to see Kulikov with $750,000 retained by the Ducks, go to Washington in exchange for maybe a guy like Connor Sherry or Marcus Johansson, someone with a small cap hit that won't impact the team. They may also throw in like a 6th or 7th round pick from this year or perhaps next year. Probably would be this year considering Anaheim is a rebuilding team that would love to get as many draft picks this year as possible with such an elite and stacked class. The Capitals, on the other hand, are trying to make the playoffs and need to make sacrifices for the better. Sacrifices could very well mean getting rid of good depth players like Sherry or Marcus Johansson to get a guy like Kulikov, who would be a way more beneficial player come playoff time. So let me know in the comments what you guys think about a Dmitry Kulikov trade to the Capitals. Does it happen? Does it not? Who wins the trade? Let me know. Otherwise, thank you guys for tuning in and have a wonderful day.